We all have that image of therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Super comfy couch.
Yeah.
Maybe like a Zen water fountain in the corner.
Right.
Basically, a safe space to unpack all our baggage.
Of course.
But what happens when the therapists themselves bring some of their own unresolved stuff into the room? That's what this deep dive is all about.
Yeah, that comfy couch image.
Yeah.
It's pretty universal, and it makes sense.
Right.
People come to therapy because they're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for help, and they need to feel safe.
Right.
But as you said, therapists are human, too.
Yeah.
We have past experiences, and sometimes those experiences can impact our work
Totally.
with clients in ways we might not even realize.
And that's what makes this conversation so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to forget that therapists aren't robots. They've got their own histories.
Right.
And for a lot of them, that history is actually what drew them to this field in the first place.
Many therapists are drawn to this work because they've experienced trauma firsthand,
Right.
either directly or through loved ones.
Okay.
They get it.
Mm-hmm.
They understand the pain, the confusion, the long road to healing.
Okay, so there's this deep well of empathy
Yeah.
that can be incredibly powerful for a client.
Right.
But when does that empathy, that shared experience, become a potential problem?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
It's not that having a history of trauma automatically disqualifies someone from being a therapist.
Right.
In fact, studies show a surprisingly high percentage of therapists have their own trauma histories.
Wow. Okay.
It's more about how those experiences have been processed.
Because let's be real, nobody's fully over everything from their past, right?
Right.
So where do we draw the line?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving some mythical state of perfect healing.
Okay.
It's about awareness.
Mhm.
It's about therapists doing their own work,
Okay.
understanding how their past might influence
Okay.
their perceptions, their reactions, even their subconscious biases
Right.
in the therapy room.
Which feels especially important when we're talking about clients with complex PTSD, right? We did a whole deep dive on CPTSD a while back. But just to recap for listeners who are new to this.
Yeah, so CPTSD often develops from prolonged exposure to trauma,
Okay.
often in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Think ongoing abuse, neglect, witnessing violence.
Right.
So not just one single event, but a pervasive pattern
Wow.
that really shapes someone's sense of self
Right.
and their relationships.
Right. So someone with CPTSD might be incredibly attuned to power dynamics,
Yes.
to any hint of those past traumas playing out again,
Right.
even if it's unintentional.
And that's where things can get tricky
Right.
if a therapist isn't fully aware of their own baggage.
Yeah.
Because those old wounds, those unresolved issues can bubble up in the therapy room, often in very subtle ways.
To illustrate this,
Okay.
let's dive into a case study, a clinical vignette
Okay.
that really brings this dynamic to life.
Okay.
And a quick heads up for listeners. This vignette does deal with emotional neglect, so just be mindful of that
Of course.
if
Yeah.
it's a sensitive topic for you.
Good point.
And keep in mind as we go through this,
Right.
these situations are never black and white. There are so many layers to unpack.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have Sarah,
Okay.
a therapist who specializes in trauma recovery.
Okay.
Sarah was drawn to this field because of her mom, who struggled with untreated PTSD for years.
So way.
Sarah saw firsthand the devastating impact of unaddressed trauma, and she vowed to make a difference in the lives of others.
And that kind of dedication
Yeah.
is so common in this field.
Yeah,
So many therapists are driven by a deep desire to help others heal
right,
because they know what it's like to hurt.
for sure.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Sarah also carries her own baggage.
Yeah.
She grew up with a narcissistic father who was emotionally neglectful.
Right.
It's something she's aware of,
Mm-hmm.
but hasn't fully addressed it in her own therapy.
And that's where this stage is set for potential difficulties. Right.
Unresolved wounds, even if we're not consciously thinking about them,
Yeah.
can color our perceptions and reactions, especially when we encounter situations that mirror our own past experiences.
And that's where Melissa enters the picture.
Okay.
Melissa's a new client dealing with, you guessed it, the fallout of a really rough childhood.
Right.
She's struggling with feelings of unworthiness, difficulty trusting people, and a pattern of unhealthy relationships.
Okay, so right away,
Yeah.
we're seeing some parallels between Sarah's past
Right.
and what Melissa's dealing with.
Yes.
Both have experienced emotional neglect from a parent,
Right.
which means there's potential for Sarah to deeply empathize with Melissa's struggles.
And that empathy can be incredibly healing for Melissa.
Oh, for sure. To have a therapist who truly gets it, who's been there,
Yes.
but.
Always a but.
And you knew there was going to be a but.
Right, right. Those shared experiences
Yeah.
can also create blind spots.
Okay.
It's like looking at a map with certain areas shaded out.
Ooh, I like that.
You might miss important details, misinterpret landmarks,
Right.
even get lost because you're so focused on what you think you already know.
So how does this actually play out in the therapy room with Sarah and Melissa?
Right.
Well, early on, Melissa starts talking about her dad, how his emotional distance and constant put-downs made her feel invisible, unworthy of love and attention.
And this is where Sarah's own stuff might start to creep in.
Because of her dad.
Remember, she's got this unresolved history with her own emotionally neglectful father.
So even though Sarah's trying her best to be present for Melissa,
Right.
her own unhealed wounds might make it tough for her to stay fully objective and attuned to what Melissa needs in those moments.
Exactly. And we're not talking about intentional malice here.
Right.
Sarah's not a bad therapist.
Right.
By any means.
Right.
She's human.
Of course.
And this is where those subconscious biases, those echoes of past experiences,
Yeah.
can really influence how a therapist responds to a client,
Right.
even with the best of intentions.
So this is all getting pretty theoretical.
Okay.
Let's get specific.
Okay.
What are some actual moments in their sessions where Sarah's own history might trip her up?
Okay.
What are some red flags to watch out for?
Yeah. Happy to dig into that.
Okay.
So picture this. Melissa is opening up about her dad, getting into the nitty-gritty of how his emotional absence really messed her up.
Mm-hmm.
She's angry, she's hurting,
Yeah.
and she's finally letting it all out.
Which for a lot of clients, that can be a huge breakthrough moment, right?
Absolutely.
That feeling of finally being able to express those pent-up emotions.
It takes so much courage to confront those deep wounds,
Right.
especially when it involves a parent.
Yeah.
But here's where things get interesting, Sarah.
Yeah.
Instead of leaning into that moment with Melissa, starts to get a little squirmy.
Squirmy how? Like she wants to change the subject.
Exactly.
Okay.
Melissa might be on a roll, really expressing her anger toward her father and Sarah,
Yeah.
maybe without even realizing it.
Right.
Starts steering the conversation in a different direction. Maybe she suggests they focus on Melissa's coping mechanisms
Yeah.
instead of the anger itself.
Okay.
Or she starts talking about how sometimes parents do the best they can.
Okay, so that parents do the best they can. Line.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
kind of classic minimizing language, right?
Right.
Like brushing off the impact of someone's experience.
On the surface, it might sound like Sarah's trying to be reassuring,
Right?
even offer a different perspective.
Yeah.
But for someone like Melissa,
Yeah.
who's already struggling with feelings of being unseen and unheard,
Right.
that kind of response can feel incredibly invalidating.
It's like you said earlier, those echoes of the past.
Right.
Sarah, even subconsciously,
Yes.
might be trying to protect herself from sitting with Melissa's anger because it hits too close to home.
Exactly.
It stirs up her own unresolved feelings about her dad.
And that's a perfect example of how countertransference can show up in therapy.
Right.
It's not that Sarah's intentionally trying to harm Melissa.
Right.
She's reacting in a way that's deeply human.
Yeah.
But without the awareness of her own stuff, she ends up recreating the very dynamic that Melissa's there to heal from.
Wow.
Yeah.
And because Melissa is dealing with CPTSD,
Right.
that dynamic feeling unseen, unheard, dismissed is especially triggering.
Exactly. Imagine this.
Yeah.
You're already feeling incredibly vulnerable, and the person who's supposed to be your safe haven,
Right.
your guide in the healing process, inadvertently minimizes your experience.
Yeah.
It's like pouring salt on a wound.
Ouch. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It reinforces those core wounds of CPTSD, those deep-seated beliefs that their feelings are wrong, that they're too much to handle.
Right. And as this pattern continues,
Right.
even if it's subtle,
Yeah.
it can really erode the sense of trust and safety
Right.
in the therapeutic relationship, which,
Mhm.
let's be honest, is the foundation of any successful therapy.
Okay, so we've seen one way
Right.
Sarah's unresolved issues might surface.
Right.
What are some other red flags to watch out for in this kind of dynamic?
Okay.
Give us another moment from the vignette that illustrates this.
Okay. So fast forward a few sessions.
Okay.
Melissa is describing a particularly vivid emotional flashback.
Okay.
She's back in her childhood bedroom, feeling utterly alone and terrified.
Oh my God.
And what's her father's response?
Yeah. What does he do?
He tells her to stop being so dramatic that she needs to grow up.
My heart just broke for little Melissa. That feeling of being abandoned in your fear,
Yes.
especially by a parent, is just gut-wrenching.
Absolutely. And that feeling of being too much,
Hmm.
of being fundamentally flawed or unworthy, can stay with someone for years,
Right.
especially if it's a recurring theme in childhood.
So how does Sarah respond to Melissa sharing this incredibly vulnerable memory?
Well, Sarah probably wanting to comfort Melissa
Yeah.
and maybe even speed up the healing process,
Mm-hmm.
tells Melissa that she needs to find a way to let go of these old hurts,
Oh, wow.
that holding on to the past is only going to keep her stuck.
Ugh. I mean, I get where Sarah's coming from.
Yeah.
She wants Melissa to feel better, but that's kind of like telling someone with a broken leg to just get up and walk, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's well-intentioned,
Mm-hmm.
but it completely misses the mark. And for someone with CPTSD,
Yeah.
who might already struggle to trust their own perceptions and emotions,
Right.
being told to just let go can feel incredibly dismissive.
It's like you're telling them that their trauma isn't a big deal.
Right.
That they're overreacting, and that can be incredibly damaging,
Yes.
especially coming from a therapist.
Precisely. And this is where understanding the nuances of CPTSD
Yes.
is so crucial for therapists, because what might seem like a harmless suggestion or even a helpful intervention to someone unfamiliar with CPTSD
Right.
can actually be deeply triggering and re-traumatizing.
So it's not just about therapists being aware of their own stuff.
Right.
It's about being knowledgeable about the specific challenges that
Yeah.
someone with CPTSD might be facing.
100%. Because if a therapist doesn't have that deeper understanding, they might miss those subtle ways
Right.
in which their own unresolved issues can intersect with a client's vulnerabilities.
Which brings us back to that idea of awareness.
Right.
How can therapists even begin to identify those potential blind spots in themselves?
Right.
And for listeners who are in therapy, what are some things they should be paying attention to?
Those are the million-dollar questions, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into next.
So we've been talking about how a therapist's unresolved trauma can create these blind spots in therapy, especially for someone dealing with CPTSD.
Right.
But just knowing this is only half the battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can therapists actually do to address this?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's something that every therapist needs to be wrestling with
Right.
throughout their career.
Yeah.
It starts with self-awareness,
Okay.
really taking the time to reflect on our own histories, our triggers, those unresolved wounds that might show up in our work.
Which, let's be honest, is easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to really face those darker corners of ourselves.
You're absolutely right. It's not always comfortable.
Yeah.
But just like we encourage our clients to lean into those uncomfortable emotions,
Right.
we as therapists need to be willing to do the same.
Right.
And that often means seeking out our own therapy.
Because the irony is not lost on anyone that the people who help others unpack their baggage often need help unpacking their own right.
Exactly. It's like the saying goes, the wounded healer heals best. When we've done our own work, when we're actively addressing our own stuff, we're less likely to project it onto our clients.
It's like you're clearing the path so you can walk alongside your clients more clearly.
Yeah.
Without tripping over your own stuff.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And beyond individual therapy,
Right.
supervision is huge.
Okay.
Having a seasoned therapist to consult with, to process those tricky cases and identify any potential blind spots, it's invaluable.
So there's this ongoing process for therapists of self-reflection, of seeking support, of constantly learning and growing.
Right.
But what about the client's role in all of this? What can listeners who are currently in therapy do if they sense that something feels off?
Yeah.
That maybe their therapist's personal stuff is getting in the way?
That's such an important question.
Yeah.
And it comes down to trusting your gut. You are the expert on your own experience.
Right.
If something feels off in the therapy room, if you feel consistently dismissed, unheard, or even re-traumatized, don't ignore those feelings.
Which, for someone with CPTSD, can be incredibly difficult.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Because their nervous system is already on high alert
Yeah.
for those signs of danger, of not being safe.
Absolutely. It takes incredible strength to speak up, especially when you're already feeling vulnerable.
Right.
But remember, therapy is a two-way street.
Right.
You have every right to advocate for your needs, to ask for what you need to feel safe and heard.
Are there any specific questions a client could ask a therapist if they're having these concerns?
Absolutely. If you're feeling brave
Okay.
and the relationship feels safe enough,
Mm-hmm.
you could try saying something like, I noticed you seemed uncomfortable when I talked about
Okay.
and then fill in the blank.
Right.
Whatever the topic is
Yeah.
that something you're able to talk about?
That's so direct, though. What if a client isn't ready for that level of confrontation?
Totally get it. It's not about forcing a conversation before you're ready.
Right.
You can always seek out a new therapist if that feels safer.
Okay.
Remember, you're not stuck.
Right.
You have the right to choose a therapist who feels like a good fit.
Right.
Someone you trust and feel comfortable with.
And sometimes that means having to try out different therapists before you find the right one.
Yes.
It can feel kind of like dating in a way.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And just like dating, sometimes you have to go on a few awkward first dates before you find someone you really click with, and that's okay.
It really is, yeah. So to wrap things up, it seems like the key takeaway here is that therapy, while incredibly healing, isn't always perfect.
Right.
And that's okay.
It's okay.
Because at the end of the day, both therapists and clients are humans with their own histories, their own baggage, and their own unique paths to healing.
Well said. It's about fostering a therapeutic relationship built on trust, transparency, and a shared understanding that healing is a journey, not a destination.
Yes.
A journey that requires courage, compassion, and a willingness to show up authentically, even when it's hard.
And for all the therapists listening out there, keep doing that crucial inner work.
Yes.
It not only makes you a better human, but a better healer as well.
Well said.
This has been so insightful. Thank you so much for diving into this with me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.